lines. He's a master spiritual scholar, warrior, strategist, master leader, organizer, professor, author, and public speaker. Dr. Outrage is an organic scholar whose scholarship emerged out of the Black liberation movement of the 60s. You'll recall that he was here a few years ago for our celebration of Mwalimu Marcus Messiah Garvey. He's the author of 5 books, each of which is considered a masterwork. He's full professor at San Francisco State University, where he taught between 1972 and 2010. He served as chairperson of the Black Studies Department between 1984 and 1996. Dr. Outrage holds a PhD in philosophy from the Western Institute of Social Research in Berkeley. He has a mastery of 18 areas, including African philosophy, African American philosophy, European philosophy, Chinese philosophy, Toltec philosophy, African and African American history, African American culture, strategy, Black political movements, African and African American leadership, traditions and systems, African and the African American family paradigm, African and African American systems of instruction, pedagogy of SIBA, and African American music and the Black church. He joins me on the phone lines later on this morning. You're inside of the Africa Forum. Our vision is to reunite the African family for development. Our vision includes breaking the cycle of mental control, blazing new paths towards Africa's rendezvous with destiny, bearing witness, demanding change, crafting an African-centered agenda for change and development, all the while honoring my moral obligation to remember. Going to the phone lines to speak with Dr. Malik Zulu Shabazz. All right, Dr. Malik? All right, not hearing. Let me try that again. All right, Dr. Malik Zulu Shabazz, I think I have him now. Greetings, my brother. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing as well as can be under all of the controversial circumstances going on in America and around the world in this hour.
Wow, and let me just say to you that I have been following you very closely, as you know, and I know that you've been up and down the road, literally ensuring that the voice of justice is raised as loudly as possible above the din. Thank you so much for that. My brother, let us start. Last week we announced you, and then we got a note from you. You were in Minnesota last week. Tell us what happened there.
Actually, technically, I was not in Minnesota. I was on my way to Minnesota, and I got diverted to serious street actions. Serious street actions here in America. And that's just how rapid it was. We were on our way to Minnesota, then we got urgent messages that they needed us on the ground in Washington. As the demonstrations and the protests spread all over America so rapidly, like we did not expect. And so not only on a political level have I been extremely busy, but also on a legal level with the police killing cases that I have. There's been some significant developments also, in this hour.
Right. Well, can you talk about those?
Yeah, sure I can. I represent Tony Green. Tony Green was killed by white Georgia police officer Zachariah Presley 2 years ago. He was on criminal trial a few months ago. The all-white jury did not convict him of what the state had charged him, which was voluntary manslaughter. Incredulously, they did not convict him of that, even though Tony Green, black man, unarmed. But all of a sudden this week, at least on the civil level, when you talk about the civil lawsuit, there's great talk now that that things have changed and that white people have changed and the white juries have changed, and they now because of the George Floyd case are going to render verdicts in favor of the plaintiffs or the victims in these cases. So I'll see about that next week. But that's what they call the good old boys. That's what the good old boys, who I'm headed to mediation with next week, are telling me. They're saying to capsulize that the racial attitudes, allegedly, that the racial attitudes around blacks in the criminal, blacks in policing and the criminal justice system has changed, and we'll see if that's true.
All right, Malik, I want to talk to you a little bit about why we march. Earlier this morning, I talked about the words of elder ancestor Malcolm X, who pointed to the fact that if we're ever to liberate ourselves, fully liberate ourselves from white supremacy, then we have to unbrainwash an entire people, culturally and otherwise. And so that there is, of course, that need, he says, to reclaim our identity, to reclaim our heritage. Here we see these marches happening all across the world. We went all the way back to 1917 on that march in New York and in Manhattan. And then 50 years later, the march in Washington. People are marching all over the world once again. Are we making a fundamental mistake in how we are approaching liberation and justice?
You can't say, that's a great question. You can't say that we are making a fundamental mistake, because we are the people. And when the people move, they're not being moved by leadership or being moved by some kind of guidance, though they should have at certain points. They're moved by their desires. What we call demonstration or protest has always been a part of our history and our struggle. You can go anywhere on the planet. You can go back to apartheid South Africa and the Sharpeville massacres, or any number of actions, what we call protest or demonstrations. However, we need to set the record clear that all of these were not what they call peaceful protest or civil demonstrations. Many of these demonstrations that got us to this radio, got us to these massive crowds, got this outrage, many of that took place because this rebellion, I call it a rebellion, started off very vociferously, I want to say, when they burned down the 3rd District Police Station in Minneapolis, when they burned down the City Hall in Nashville, when they burned down the courthouse in Nashville, when they burned police cars all over America, this marked a change in the civil rights, more docile demonstration tactics that had been controlled by leadership before. Basically, the street took control. And because the street took such strong actions at the symbols of their oppression, it was mainly at the institutions and the symbols of their oppression rather than the local corner store. This, in fact, sparked large civil demonstrations and got us to where we are today. So demonstrations are fine, but we must make the point here that they have not, and they were not, and they will not continue to be all what they call peaceful or nonviolent. It wasn't peaceful for George Floyd, and it wasn't peaceful for all of the other victims of police brutality when they died. And so there's a revolutionary, conscious, and very aggressive youth out there that we need to appreciate, because they are the drive behind the conversation.
And we're seeing Kwame Ture, for example, says, when they marched back in the day, he said, we weren't marching for integration. We were marching for full liberation. What will it take?
Right.
What will it take for... Is it important? Is this distinction important even today?
It's a critical importance, because what your demonstration is a form of agitation and advocacy to bring about awareness and changes, and it motivates people. It gives chances to be involved. Of course, it's the purposes. Things are changing in America from the perspective of previously. Most demonstrations were, I would say, orchestrated or organized by a certain limited group of civil rights leadership. the NAACP or the SCLC would officially sponsor and represent all the marches. What happened around Ferguson in 2014 is that civil rights leaders, no matter their involvement with the case, they did not control the street. And so the street became controlled by groups like, say, Black Lives Matter. In other instances, the New Black Panther Party. In other instances, it was just groups. It's just brothers and sisters taken to the street without any control, and they are fighting for general liberation, like they are here in America. When you go out on the front lines, these kids are not just talking about George Floyd in one case. They're talking about the system of police brutality, 400 years of oppression, and you would be surprised. There's a new generation of strong youth that are very liberation oriented. So demonstrations are mobilization. They're important. We hope they keep going.
And we notice that
some of your comments.
And hundreds of thousands of Americans, Black Americans, have taken to the street, but Americans generally, but also here we're witnessing something that we hardly ever see, that hundreds of thousands of people are taking to the streets all across the world. We're looking at what's happening, unfolding in the UK between yesterday and today. We're looking at what we see happening in Germany with those silent protests, in other parts of Europe. And it's interesting. In Jamaica, for example, there was a march on the U.S. Embassy here yesterday, and before that there was another march. So that it's happening here, but people are also bringing to these spaces, these protests, the local issues, but encouraged by what's happening in the United States. How important is it at this moment, for Black America to recognize that it is leading a process of liberation and to take hold of a global process of liberation for the African diaspora, and to take hold of that?
They must take hold of it, otherwise it would be co-opted. They must take hold of it. And so our message here to blacks here in America and around the world is that, yes, it is true. You can't deny when you look at the television screen here and everywhere that you see a variety of races. You see many whites out there around the world participating, involved in the demonstrations and others. But it's critical that black people and black leadership of strength be out front, be accounted for, to help take, to add strength and leadership and direction to what's going on. It's critical that we understand that this is an international problem. The reason why you're seeing such a world outcry is because we've seen this over and over again. The world has seen excessive force, deadly force, constantly used against black people the way they know it's not used against any other race. It's clearly a case of human rights violations and racism. And now what the world is saying through this one case is that enough is enough. Sadly, as much attention is on this, and whichever way this goes, you can predict, almost like coronavirus, that the police virus is going to hit within another week or two. Within another week or two, a month, there'll be more. So this is a great chance for black America. And I have to be honest with Sister Kabul, many black organizations, some black organizations are taking up the fight, but many black organizations that you would define as quote-unquote liberation organizations have not taken a leadership stand in this fight and have gotten slow or seem like they confused. And therefore, these movements kind of can go any way when you don't have people that you've counted on for liberation, when you've counted on them and they're absent in the fight. Hell, anybody can take over after that.
And this is a fear, isn't it, that it's co-opted by other interests, and that when it's all finished, when the streets are silent again, that the policies and the systemic structural violence that we experience as black people wherever we are, that it will not be dealt with from a legislative or a policy perspective.
Well, that's a very valid concern. on a policy level, there's some things that are, well, on a practical level. Like, for example, I'm watching the Fairfax County Police this morning. An officer was clearly using excessive force and a chokehold that was not correct on a black man he was trying to arrest, and he was fired by that police officer. We looked in Atlanta. Some officers had jumped on a sister in a vehicle and broke all the windows out. We saw it on CNN. One of my legal associates, Mawuli Davis, representing that case, and they fired the officer. So there are some right now, some what we call practical changes.
Yes.
But policy is a little more different because you have a certain set of rules here that have actually encouraged and emboldened the police over the years. You have the doctrine of qualified immunity. Immunity means to be immune from suit, immune from criminal prosecution. So the rules are very much set in favor of the police, and so again, this is just a long-term situation. This is not a short-term situation. Black Lawyers for Justice and myself are certainly going to be on the front line of the fight to fight for what we call institutional or policy changes or legal changes inside of the court system. And those are possible. Be. You and I know as black or African people that violence and aggressiveness against our people seems to be, I can't even say seems to be, is in the nature of our oppressor. The nature of whites versus blacks is to use excessive force, to use excessive violence. The question is, can you change the nature of white interactions with blacks from a law enforcement perspective? And I have serious doubts about that.
And then this leads us...
That don't mean we don't have to fight.
Exactly, and it leads to the question that we are asking all morning, and we'll continue to ask: what does justice require?
In general, or in the George Floyd case?
In general.
Well, that's a heavy question. And justice in general requires many things. Full and complete reparations for our people. Justice in general, if you want to be honest with me, requires, as I have always believed and will continue to advocate for, a separate state and territory of our own where we can rule and govern ourselves. Because, as I say, this pandemic of white violence, it just does not cease, it does not cease. So there are ultimate aims of justice, and they are in line with the Pan-African aims of liberation and justice around the world. That's why I'm out here. When you see attorney at law, if I'm not litigating on the case, I'm going to be out in the streets.
Yes.
Because I know that these movements at some point can be co-opted, and you'll have officers kneeling and throwing some flowers to the demonstrators, and then they'll bring out the music and we start dancing, and next thing you know, it'll be the police brutality dance. They'll be dancing to this thing. We're not going to let it happen. Can't let it happen. We must have full and complete liberation. We must have reparations. As you say earlier, we must have debt relief. We must as Pan-African leadership rise right now. You cannot leave this to civil rights. This is a human rights issue. And Pan-African leadership all over the world should do what the old Panthers said: seize the time. And seize the time right about now, because the water is moving in our favor.
Yeah, it's interesting because that is the topic of my bottom line this morning, which I haven't presented yet, which is seize a day, So, and you've used it because I think this is where we are now, to seize the moment, seize a time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. It is up to us to make the change right now, or to lead a change. And I'm wary because I'm watching very closely, and I'm seeing that the movement has already changed, and that, as you said, and the people dancing and so on. So I feel optimistic when I hear you say we're not going to let it happen. And it's not just for you to say that in America. We must say that here on the ground in Jamaica. We must be saying that in Barbados, in Trinidad. in the Virgin Islands, wherever we are on the continent of Africa and in South America, this is something we must be saying. It seems organic now, but is there a need for leadership on this?
There's always a need for leadership on it, because as the demonstrations go, but as demonstrations typically go, at some point they wane or they lose strength. And what it is that those who are, let's say, who are Garveyites, those who are black nationalists, those who are true to our creed, sometimes tend to be absent at these times. On whatever theoretical basis they tend to be absent on. And what happens is they don't get a grip in these movements, and therefore they're not a part of the organization and the changes that could come after such huge mobilizations. And we've also, you made an important comment, we've also yearned and we prayed for another generation that would stand up. We asked for our youth, that our youth would lose the idle mind and that they would focus on liberation and serious things. So it's a critical time. It's a critical time for us as Pan-Africanists to articulate our real demands, our real goals, and not let our goals be co-opted by reformists. Mm-hmm. It's a critical time for black nationalists, Pan-Africanists, whether they're lawyers or street organizers or they're union reps. It's a critical time for us to advocate for the strongest of our demands. Otherwise, they will be co-opted.
Mm-hmm. And reiterate those demands for us, the strongest of our demands, because I hear you on reparations. And we in Jamaica, we're not leaving out repatriation on that. So what are some of the critical demands?
You asked about the demands for what?
Right, for full liberation. And I'd asked you that before, so I'm just asking you to reiterate what these are when I asked you what justice would require. And obviously you talked about reparations, and I'm saying here in Jamaica we're throwing in repatriation without apology. And I heard you said that just now when you said, well, listen, we are also, if truth be told, it's our own state. As Kwame Ture says, we're not fighting for integration, we're fighting for liberation. And white violence is what white violence is, as you're pointing out. So what are the critical demands that need to be made right now?
Well, in my judgment, and what we will be advocating for, once again, full and complete reparations for our people must be right back on the front burner. It flares up here last year, big conversation about reparations and congressional hearings. But once again, full and complete reparations. For us, it includes here in America a demand for land, territory, and honest separation, a territory of our own, because we have concluded and we have been taught and we have concluded that living with whites is absolutely disagreeable to live with in peace, living in a white society. Mm-hmm. Okay, other than that, other than those strongest of demands, as you say, reparations, repatriation, debt relief, then you have overhauls in the criminal justice system, overhaul in the laws in America, and just overhauls in how policing and criminal justice is carried out in America. And those are what we call reforms, and some of those reforms I believe may take place if we keep the pressure on. But if we organize and keep organizing for our ultimate gains, they can occur. They can occur. But I have to tell you, Sister Kapu, when it comes to your strongest of demands for reparations and repatriation, those who you would expect to be organized and advocating for those causes right now are behind the curve. The people are out there advocating for justice, and those who advocate for our strongest position seem to be confused on how to handle the situation, and that's unfortunate.
Yes, it is, and we see that right across the board, not just in the U.S. Britain, it seems, have caught on to it before most because of what I see happening with the protests there, and as you say, the rebellion. But generally speaking, you'd have thought that in this moment you would be hearing as loud a cry as you would ever hear for reparations, for repatriation. But we're not hearing that. And those who, the platform is taken over, it seems, by other voices who are not even so concerned about the African connection, that African identity that Kwame Ture talks about, that African heritage. And if that is left out of it, if we disassociate ourselves, if we distance ourselves from Africa, what then?
Well, where we end up is fighting for reforms instead of the complete revolution we seek. And I really can't say that. I could say that other groups have taken over the message, but I would have to tell you that the groups that we would normally expect to advocate for reparations, for example, here in Cobra is leading one of the leading reparations groups here. Well, I mean, honestly speaking, they still trying to figure out how they gonna handle the George Floyd situation, what policy they will adopt. So they probably could be at the center of it, could be at the front of it, yet they can't figure it out. You know, others who we would expect, the Nation of Islam here has been absent from everything. You know, we want them to be there. They have advocated for many of their positions. We need them right now, but they haven't figured out whether they're going to go to the street or whether they're going to retreat. And so a lot of the groups that hold our position have they don't know how to move with the people and move with the wave of the people, and they don't know how to tap into a police brutality movement and turn it up to the next level. But the good news is that the people don't always need it. Some of those youth out there that you see just advocating for police brutality, when I'm out there on the front lines with them, they're talking the same thing you're talking.
Brilliant.
They're talking against white supremacy in general. They're talking about reparations. They're talking about African culture. They're talking about the things that you and I talked about when we were 22 years old and 23 years old. So maybe this is like what the Bible says, that older generation is passing out. Remember,
it's a change of the baton, and the leaders will arise out of this movement.
Oh, it is a rise, and that's why I like being out there, because I feel like I'm a good ally and mentor to these young kids because I'm uncompromising. I'm not there trying to tell them to hold back. I'm telling them what to attack. I mean, to use that terminology. So things are going well in this hour. Things are going well, and I can tell you, I can speak for Black Lawyers for Justice, for my allies in Black Empowerment, and in the new Black Panther Party, that we're gonna make sure we keep the heat on, and that we are your brothers and sisters in the international body that can help carry out international policy. The things that you want there, we are your allies to advocate for it.
Brilliant. It really
we're here.
You know, it is, we're watching this, we're watching with awe, and we're saying this must be, if no other time, then we must seize this time. As you said, seize the day. This is it. Thank you so much, my brother, and continue. I know you're out there in the trenches. I know you're in the field. I know you're in the streets, and I know you're there in no ordinary way. Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
Keep the fire blazing.
No problem. Love you so much. Our website is blackrightsmatter.org, blackrightsmatter.org, and black-empowerment.com. We're fighting in the courtroom and in the streets. Love you all. Thank you, Sister Kapu.
Thank you so much, my brother. Malik Zulu Shabazz.
See you soon.
Thank you. All right, Malik Zulu Shabazz there, our brother at the forefront of the struggle and the fight for liberation.